Evening. We have a very special guest speaking with us about a topic of importance and interest. Ambassador Chas Freeman will be speaking with us tonight, delivering a talk entitled "How Competitive is the United States with China?" I think everybody on the call is probably familiar with Ambassador Freeman. He's a retired career diplomat with a long and impressive career of serving our country in positions all over the world. Some, I won't list all of his positions, but some of them include he was United States ambassador to Saudi Arabia. He was head of embassy in Bangkok and Beijing. He was assistant secretary of defense and many other positions. Also, when President Nixon traveled to China, Ambassador Freeman was the chief translator at that time. So it's a very big honor for me to introduce Ambassador Freeman. For the format of tonight's event, he's going to deliver us a talk, as I mentioned, in which he has some supporting materials, slides, and whatnot. And after his talk, we'll have a Q&A session, hopefully to wrap up around, I would say, 7:40 or so, 7:45 maybe. So again, everyone, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, Ambassador Freeman. And once again, I'm very honored to be introducing you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Amr. You've exposed the fact that I couldn't keep a job. I kept moving around doing different things. We Americans have bet our future on competition with China. And the keys to winning this competition are clearly domestic economic and technological renewal, as well as enhanced influence abroad. And so far, the evidence suggests that we are achieving neither. Yet we have just started an economic forever war with China. What's happening reminds me of the saying, "Quos Deus vult perdere, prius dementat." Whom the gods would destroy, they first make mad. Our country now disparages public service. It's taking a chainsaw to its institutions. Such self-sabotage weakens our state capacity, reduces our situational awareness, clouds our decision-making, degrades essential government services, and fuels rather than alleviates popular discontent. These trends invite adversaries to exploit American decline. They also cost us the respect and support of allies and friends. We Americans have long been in denial about our many domestic and foreign problems. They're now visibly getting worse. Subconsciously, we appear to understand this, but we blame it on everyone but ourselves. Our allies and friends see us chaotically making threats, imposing tariffs, and coveting their territory. They view our predatory behavior as an irrational and incoherent response by us to challenges that are largely of our own making. Just short of 30% of Americans chose Donald J. Trump as our president in the hope that he would make America great again. But frankly, what he and his unelected billionaire buddies, band of talking heads and digital delinquents are doing is not correcting the bumbling Biden administration's legacy, but undermining both our long-term competitiveness and our standing abroad. Let me count the ways. First, our alliances. We are alarming and alienating those countries historically most friendly and loyal to us. We menace Canada with hostile takeover. We threaten to seize Greenland from Denmark, like Canada, a NATO ally. Polls show that many allies now regard us as a threat rather than as a partner or protector. And as we shut ourselves off from global trade, we treat them no better than we treat our foes. In a world of loosening relationships, this all but guarantees that some of them will seek to separate their fates from ours. Our friends. We're bullying Mexico with threats of economic warfare and military attack. Tariffs on imports from Mexico would further impoverish it. Deprived of their livelihood, more Mexicans will flee their country in a desperate search for a better life in ours. Military threats are more likely to drive Mexico into the arms of our adversaries than to secure their cooperation. We have transformed Panama from a reliable friend and manager of the canal it operates into a fearful target of potential aggression by our armed forces. By alienating neighbors, we are opening our formerly secure sphere of influence in the Western Hemisphere to inroads by great powers beyond it. Our moral standing. Israel's cynical war of annihilation against the Palestinians has supplanted the European Jewish Holocaust as the global epitome of evil. We are shameless accomplices in Israel's genocide, sadism, land grabs, and other war crimes. Our reputation as a beneficent international actor. We have ended our support for humanitarian and development assistance. Countries that once clung to us and our professed values now see us as both amoral and heartlessly selfish. They are looking for alternative sources of inspiration and support. They will find our adversaries eager to supply both. China and Russia led the relief effort that followed the recent earthquake in Mandalay, Burma, Myanmar. We were absent. I was there in the first place before. We were absent from this disaster relief effort. Our status as an honorable, law-abiding nation, we have become infamous for our disrespect of the UN Charter and related treaties and conventions, our invasions of other countries on flimsy pretexts, our pursuit of territorial aggrandizement at the expense of both allies and friends, our unprincipled abandonment of solemnly contracted commitments, and our punishment of those attempting to enforce international law. Others now see our behavior as that of a mafia don, not a responsible member of the international community. Our leadership on planet-wide problems, we have withdrawn from an increasing number of international rulemaking bodies and are absent from even more multilateral meetings. We have abandoned both diplomacy and arms control as means by which to bolster global stability and peace. Our government is no longer part of the global effort to retard or mitigate climate change. Our research and development capabilities. U.S. universities have long been the world's most powerful magnets for global talent. Cuts in federal support for R&D and visa restrictions now aim explicitly to debase our university's cultural influence. American academic hegemony is on the way out. Our economic and technological competitiveness. Protectionism is an explicit admission that many elements of our economy as currently structured can no longer stand up to foreign competition. Our new habit of banning technological innovations made elsewhere from our market is even more damaging. This subsidizes and preserves uncompetitive backwardness. Consider the steel industry, electric vehicles, TikTok, DeepSeek, solar panels, wind power, and telecommunications as examples. By denying ourselves the benefits of intellectual advances by others, we've chosen a path that leads inexorably to technological inferiority. And finally, our leading companies' markets. Denying U.S. IT companies access to China, their largest overseas market, deprives them of the revenue they need to stay ahead of their Chinese and other competitors. As the saying goes, when the winds of change blow, some people build walls while others build windmills. Rather than focusing on self-improvement and seizing opportunities, Americans have chosen to throw our declining weight around internationally We rely on brute force economic, financial, or military coercion to bring other countries to heel. This is no way to compete with China or any other rising or resurgent great power, and it is no way to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. Meanwhile, despite many difficulties and not a few mistaken policies, China continues to power ahead. While we scapegoat and bully others, the Chinese remain single-mindedly focused on enhancing their economic, scientific, and technological prowess. They are ready, willing, and able to reach out to the foreign partners we are alienating. China had a couple of bad centuries, but it's back, and in the process of resuming its millennial position as the world's largest economy. Hammer, could you put on slide 2? I can't see the slide, so I will have to assume that that is, in fact, the last 1,000 years or so of economic history in a chart. And if you look at that, you will see that in 1820, China was about a third of the global economy, and that's pretty much where it's coming back to now. India also, throughout most of history, was an enormous force in the global economy. The US peaked in 1950, if you look at that chart. China's growth has slowed, but it's still growing twice as fast as the United States. In purchasing power terms, which avoid the significant distortions imposed by an overvalued US dollar and changing exchange rates, the Chinese economy is already 1/3 larger than ours. Next slide, please. So you can see the size of the Chinese economy on this chart, which is quite surprising to people. Everywhere in our press, we see the second largest economy when China is mentioned, but that is a distorted view. Look at slide 4, the next slide. China produces more than 1/3 of the world's manufacturers. It's the world's largest trading nation and principal trading partner of more than 100 countries. Now, this chart, these charts, that is the slide that China as a manufacturing superpower, doesn't have totally up-to-date data. The share of manufacturing capacity in particular goods is from 2023, but the share of global production is from 2022. It's probably now about 34% rather than the 31.2% that the chart shows. Now, over 1/4 of the world's STEM workers, scientists, technologists, engineers, and mathematicians are Chinese. That proportion is growing. Nearly half of the world's patent applications now originate in China. Look at the next slide. And you'll see here that these, the patents applications are from 2021. China's growth year on year, that year was about 5.9%. And it dwarfed the United States, which had about a 1% increase. China was 51.1% of the global patent applications way back then in 2023, and the trend has continued. U.S. exports, sanctions, and other efforts to hamstring or reverse Chinese advances are demonstrably not working. Their main effects have been to stimulate China to redouble its efforts to become self-sufficient, to boost its commitment to science and technology, to further improve its already formidable educational standards, and to explore ways to counter U.S. financial hegemony. The latest Nature Index, the authoritative index on this subject, rates Harvard as the world's #1 university in natural and health sciences, with MIT in 10th place. Chinese universities hold places 2 through 9. China's challenges to our global preeminence are economic, scientific, and technological. There are no Chinese warships or bombers off our coasts. China espouses no territorial claims against us, whereas we have territorial claims against it, apparently. But in accordance with our heavily militarized approach to foreign affairs, our response to China's resurgence is almost entirely military. We have ringed China with bases aimed at it. Next slide, please. Some people have suggested that China has malignly moved itself to be close to our bases, but that is obviously nonsense. We conduct 3 or 4 aggressive patrols of China's coasts and island bastions daily. 75 years ago, we intervened militarily to protect the losing side of the Chinese Civil War by separating it and Taiwan from the rest of China. Since then, the Taiwan issue has been an embryonic Sino-American casus belli. We refuse to say whether we would use force to counter an attempt by Beijing to recover Taiwan, but the Chinese assume we would, and they are acting accordingly. The result is escalating Sino-American tension and an arms race that our military commanders suggest we're in the process of losing. Of course, we can't be too sure this isn't just their usual use of threat inflation to further inflate their budgets and gratify the military-industrial complex they expect to join upon retirement. Still, Chinese military innovations are indeed impressive. A huge arsenal of very accurate missiles, including some capable of striking naval vessels underway at long distances, others that are hypersonic, and many that are road mobile. By far, the world's largest navy, including more capable aircraft and carriers for them, as well as submarines, world-beating drones, innovative landing craft, long-range ship-to-ship missiles, and railguns. The world's 3rd largest air force, including both 5th generation and prototype 6th generation aircraft, advanced air defenses, and electronic warfare, as well as cyber attack capabilities. The initial battleground in any U.S.-China war would be in China, including Taiwan and China's near seas. China would be fighting on its own doorstep, enjoying very short lines of communication and supply lines. The United States would be projecting power to a battlefield over 7,000 miles away from our west coast. China would enjoy the many advantages of being on the defensive. From Beijing's perspective, the war would be about recovering and defending Chinese territory against foreign attack. In other words, about things that Chinese care much more about than Americans do. Multiple war games suggest that a U.S.-China war over Taiwan could cost both sides the bulk of our navies and aircraft. China has the industrial surge capacity to replace its ships and aircraft, but we do not. Losses on the scale projected would cripple the United States as a global power, not just cost it its 8 decades-long dominance of Pacific Asia. The one certain outcome of a war over the political status of Taiwan would be the destruction of its democracy, as well as its prosperity and its industrial base. The ruin of Taiwan's advanced electronic industries would ensure huge collateral damage to the world economy. Such a war could have no winners, even if it did not escalate to the nuclear level, which both sides assume it could. Notwithstanding this, the focus of U.S. policy in Pacific and South Asia at present is on preparing for a trans-Pacific war with China and on persuading U.S. allies in the region to risk letting Americans use bases on their territory against China. In response, China is preparing for war with America. The U.S. and Chinese defense budgets are structured so differently that it's hard to compare them. Both omit significant amounts of military-related spending and cover them in other budgets. All in all, however, China now appears to be spending less than 2% of its GDP on national defense, while the U.S. Defense Department's budget alone is about 3.6% of GDP. Including U.S. military-related spending in other departments and agencies' budgets would bring total U.S. military spending to about 5.4% of U.S. GDP. The disparity in spending levels reflects many factors, one not least of which is the People's Liberation Army's exclusive focus on the security of the Chinese homeland and adjacent areas versus a U.S. military force structure designed to preserve U.S. global primacy by projecting American power to every corner of the world rather than just defending the American homeland. Our Defense Department is misnamed. In reality, it is an offense department. If Americans' concerns were truly limited to defending ourselves, we would spend a lot less. We would also consider diplomacy as a cheaper and more reliable way to make more friends and fewer enemies. Of course, defense budgets do not decide the outcome of warfare, but the balance of fervor often does, as the failure of our effort to prevent the unification of Vietnam or to pacify Afghanistan should remind us. In a bloody American rendezvous with Chinese nationalism over Taiwan, the balance of fervor would strongly favor China. So, increasingly, would the military balance. And the more both sides prepare for war, the more likely it becomes. U.S. policy has shifted from favoring a peaceful settlement of the divisions between Taipei and Beijing to de facto support for Taiwan's indefinite separation from the China mainland. This approach rejects diplomacy to rely entirely on military posturing against China. It is a direct challenge to China's sovereignty, territorial integrity, and national security, as well as to its amour propre. China sees unsettling analogies to the evolution of U.S. policy toward the war in Ukraine. The U.S. objective has not been to promote Ukraine's well-being or its domestic tranquility, still less to save Ukrainian lives, but to counter, isolate, and weaken Russia. Similarly, in the case of Taiwan, the U.S. seems much less concerned about Taiwan and its inhabitants than about showing China who's boss, weakening it, and countering and containing its influence abroad. China is as opposed to the strategic use of Taiwan against it as Russia has been to the incorporation of Ukraine into an alliance hostile to it, or for that matter, as the United States was to a menacing Soviet presence on the island of Cuba. Russia's special military operation in Ukraine has been carefully limited. It may seem to demonstrate that superpowers can conduct a proxy war without resorting to nuclear weapons. But a war over Taiwan would not be a proxy war fought in a third country like Korea, Vietnam, or Ukraine, but a war conducted directly between U.S. and Chinese forces on territory universally acknowledged to be Chinese, Taiwan and the China mainland. Such a war could not and would not be limited. The Chinese would inevitably respond to U.S. devastation of parts of their homeland by counterattacking ours. Each side would be tempted to employ nuclear weapons to incapacitate the other. The United States is currently engaged in a massive program of nuclear force modernization aimed explicitly at prevailing in a war with China. The United States remains the only country to have ever used nuclear weapons against another people. U.S. nuclear doctrine explicitly authorizes a nuclear first strike on enemies, whether nuclear armed or not. In the past, on at least 3 occasions, the Chinese say 6, our government has threatened to launch a nuclear attack on China. We have provided no assurances that we will not do so again. This and the mounting likelihood of a Sino-American war over Taiwan have catalyzed an unfortunate change in Chinese nuclear strategy. China was long content with a minimal nuclear capability, a force de frappe in the French phrase, one able to respond to a nuclear attack by taking enough of a bite out of the enemy to cause it to think twice about using nuclear weapons to attack any part of China. But China is now embracing mutually assured destruction, mad, and building a nuclear force that could destroy the United States if Americans use nuclear weapons to attack China. A war that can not only not be won, that not only cannot be won, but it also risks becoming existential, should obviously never be fought. Our diplomacy should focus on ensuring that it never is. A diplomacy-free, all military, all the time U.S. policy toward China, like our current policy, therefore makes no sense at all. The Chinese military posture is defensive. Our military is in China's face. People's Liberation Army is not in ours. It will not appear off our coasts or in our hemisphere unless we drive it to reciprocate our threatening presence on its borders. Our current policies risk convincing China eventually to do just that. This underscores the absurdity of how Americans are dealing with China's return to its millennial wealth and power. China's eclipse of all U.S. global primacy and its dominance of Pacific Asia is grounded in the growing scientific, technological, and economic dynamism that it possesses. Next slide, please. These are projections to 2030, which is not that far away. 5 years from now, we will see 37.6% of the world's STEM workers in China. India will have 26.7%, Russia 4.5%, and we'll be fourth with 4.2%. That is, all this was drawn up before we set out to wreck our universities. In any event, by 2030, China will probably have almost 9 times as many STEM workers as we will. It's not the basic threat is not military, even if the People's Republic has now built a formidable capacity to defend itself. Unlike the Soviet Union, China does not occupy other countries or seek to impose its authoritarian ideology on them or on us. Unlike Nazi Germany, China is not in search of Lebensraum. Unlike Imperial Japan or European imperialists, China does not pursue military colonial control of foreign natural resources or labor. Nor does China seek to replicate the imperial market preferences and mercantilism of past empires. All these analogies are false, but groupthink, born of anxieties about American decline, has transformed them and evidence-free conjectures into accepted axioms that are constantly reiterated and that cannot be questioned. Our present China policies are based on politically correct assumptions born of conjectures rather than the realities they purport to describe. They are dogmatic, delusional, and dangerous, and they come with high opportunity costs. The ironies in this situation abound. We Americans accuse China of seeking to replace the US-sponsored world order with its own. But China is far more committed to the post-World War II order and its core ideas of free trade and multilateralism than we now are. It has integrated itself into that order and used it to advance Chinese interests. Unlike us, China has not withdrawn from the World Trade Organization, launched protectionist trade wars, or condemned international institutions like the World Court for doing their job. The new institutions China has helped create, like the Asian Infrastructure and Development Bank, complement Bretton Woods institutions like the World Bank and mirror their rules. They supplement rather than replace the pre-existing world order. China is among the staunchest supporters of the United Nations Charter and the Westphalian Order it is meant to regulate. We accuse China of aggression. China has indeed defended its longstanding claims to islets, reefs, and fishing grounds against other claimants in its near seas and its disputed border with India. But it has not made all-out war invaded, dismembered, or occupied other countries as we have. It does not seek to annex the territories or take possession of the canals in other countries. Unlike us, China has not backed others like Israel in wars of annihilation and territorial aggrandizement. Instead, it has made itself available as a peacemaker and mediator, most notably between Saudi Arabia and Iran. We accuse China of attempting to thwart our campaign to, quote, isolate and weaken, unquote, Russia. But China has not recognized the separation of Crimea and other Russian-speaking oblasts from Ukraine any more than it has recognized NATO's forced separation of Kosovo from Serbia. China continues to trade with both Ukraine and Russia. Ukrainian drones are all built on Chinese parts. If China is definitely not with us, it is not necessarily against us. We accuse China of malign behavior. In practice, this seems to mean any reduction in our international influence, wherever it occurs, whatever the cause. China has emerged as the largest contributor to the economic development of countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. It may or may not now attempt to fill the vacuum that our sudden embrace of protectionism and our mean-spirited cessation of foreign assistance have created. Other countries are poised to ask it to do so. We shall see how it responds. There are lots of things to criticize about China and its political system. China also has more than its fair share of problems. But it's for the Chinese, not us, to deal with these. In this context, mirror imaging to produce a portrait of China that much of the world would say better describes us is not just a faulty basis for policy, but counterproductive. It is entirely correct to describe China as a systemic challenge to our current internal disorder and decadence, fiscal improvidence, oligopoly and plutocracy-dominated economy, complacent sense of superiority, jingoistic foreign policy, job-stripping financial capitalism, and collapsing educational standards. But the operative question for Americans is what to do about those things. There are many elements of the Chinese system from which we might usefully draw inspiration, but China's authoritarianism and disrespect for the rule of law, which we are now inadvertently emulating, should not be among them. We cannot replay the strategy of containment that successfully isolated the Soviet Union until it succumbed of its own defects. Attempting to do so with China will isolate and impoverish us rather than the Chinese. China is outperforming us. It faces many challenges, but it is socially stable, economically productive, ever more scientifically and technologically capable, increasingly innovative, and internationally engaged. We may snarl at globalization, but globalization is continuing without us, and China remains both at its center and a major beneficiary of it. Attempting to perpetuate our global primacy and pacification hegemony by cutting ourselves off from China and the world is an evasion of the pressing need to reform our system to make it more competitive. Focusing on hamstringing China rather than getting our own act together entails huge opportunity costs. We now live on credit rollovers and pyramiding debt, yet we refuse to accept investment from China, which is capital rich and prepared to finance improvements in our failing infrastructure, establish new factories here, and help expand U.S. agricultural production to assure food supplies for its own population as well as ours. China has the renewable energy technologies we need to go electric, but we seem determined to obstruct or ban our companies from importing or adopting them. The U.S. and Chinese economies are complementary, as their interdependence has amply demonstrated. We need a reset with China. In this connection, diatribe is no substitute for diplomatic dialogue. It alienates. It does not persuade. The Trump administration has at least one thing very right. U.S. security does not depend on coercing foreigners into conformity with our values. We could make America truly great again by moving away from a mindset that quixotically insists on compelling others conform to our increasingly unrealistic self-image. Instead, we should seek to understand other peoples, including the Chinese, respect them for who and what they are, and do our best to leverage their prosperity and technological advances to enhance our own. Thank you.